Well, we bring Will in because Will, you do a great job with us on Nesson, and it's hard to believe that by the end of this, at the end of this Blue Jays series, we will have seen the Red Sox play 81 games. We are at the mathematical midway point of the 2024 season, and I always wonder. You guys have done this a long time. You know, you never want to say, as you guys know, you can't say it in the studio. Never say a game is going fast. Because I'll get you fired, because that will jinx the game and it will go 20 innings and there'll be 2 rain delays. The most important question I guess I have to start is, can you jinx a season? Because it seems like this season is flying by.
Not in today's game, not with the pitch clock, right? It's like long games are 3 hours now instead of 4. Yeah. So if we have a 3-hour game, we have a 3-hour game. It's because we're scoring runs, which lately that's been the case with this team because they've been scoring a lot more runs than they had earlier in the season. But if the 3-hour, 5-minute game is considered long, count me in for that.
Yes, Tom, you can jinx it, and don't mess this up for any of us, please. But I think that I'm totally with you. Like, the pace of this season has been surprising. I think it's because it's been interesting. It's been unexpected. The season has not unfolded according to script, right? The thing that will make seasons drag is when you have that circling of the drain over the last month of it, right? Like, if you have September of 2023, that feels like a very long time of the season. But when you have a team that's kind of ascendant, then there are lots of different things that are interesting to pick apart, rather than like each game feeling like paint dripping.
Well, and that, right? I mean, hang on, let's start there, because I think that the word I use is fun, right? I've heard the word resilient a lot, but I mean, it's certainly, as they've played better here over the last weeks, and the Phillies and Yankees series really seem to give the young team a jolt of confidence. But it's a fun team to watch. It's a fun brand of baseball. Even when they lose, they are rarely blown out. They steal bases. They advance runners. They seem to have simplified their approach a little bit at the plate. Will, this has been a fun team to watch, hasn't it?
It has, and I think obviously we're very caught up in the last 2.5 weeks that they've been really good, right? Starting with the Phillies series, they're coming off a tough one in Chicago where they split with the worst team in baseball, and you're going, this is about to get ugly. Like, this is the point where we fall off the edge of the cliff, because it felt like they were hanging on all year up until that point, where there's injuries, where it was guys not playing well, where just the up and down, the peaks and valleys, and the valleys seemed like they were getting lower at that time. Then obviously they've rattled off this last couple of weeks of good baseball. And so, yes, those last couple of weeks have been impressive, but I think I was more impressed with just how they did tread water and how they stayed competitive when they were at their worst. I think we talk about the players a lot. We don't talk about the coaches unless it's going bad. So I want to give the coaching staff a little bit of love here, because looking at this team, I feel like this coaching staff and TC, we've had these conversations. We feel like they went against the grain. They went against the league trends, right? Whether it was Andrew Bailey coming in and saying, look, the league is throwing velocity, throwing 4-seamers. That's what you guys have been doing. That's what the league does. That's what they tell you to do. We're not going to do it, because what I know and what I've learned about pitchers and the way you release the baseball, it doesn't work. It's going to make you a worse pitcher if you throw that pitch. So they kind of went away against the grain in that trend. And then we've started to see, as the reports come out of Pete Fatsi and Alex Cora having individual hitters meetings with the hitters. That doesn't happen unless you are really struggling, right? But they're doing it as in every series thing. First day of every series, instead of having just a massive team meeting and it being a cookie cutter, here's the approach, here's who you're facing, this is what you need to do against them. They're putting in the extra work and going in individual and say, here's your approach. We're going to build this to your strengths, not to the pitcher's strengths, because that's when you fall into trouble. It's like if you're facing a really good sinker, but if you're facing Derek Lowe, he wants you to say, oh, I got to hit the sinker, because then you're going to fire it off your ankle and have permanent lumps on your shin like I did, because that's what I did, was chase sinkers in. They're building these guys up, and they're shaping their plans at the plate to their strength. And it's each individual, which is not cookie cutter. It is everybody's different. And I think that is how they are, getting the most juice out of the fruit, right? Getting the most talent out of each individual guy. And when I say going against the grain on the hitting side, it's still the 3 outcome at bats, right? Homer, walk, strikeout. It's still big on every team. Teams still pay the power hitters. They're not paying guys to hit 320 with 5 homers. They don't care about that still. Even with the shift being gone from baseball, you saw averages go up a little bit last year, not a ton, because hitters are still stuck in their ways. This team is going against that. And part of that is the personnel. Yeah, I get it. You don't have big thumpers. Costas will be back. Hopefully he does. O'Neal stays healthy. Great. Devers, he does his thing. But it's mostly a gap-to-gap, singles, doubles, walks, steal bases, manufacture run team. And they said, you know what? We're gonna go against the grain here and play old school baseball, and it's working.
I want to take a step back. You mentioned the coaching staff and the fact that they have the individualized meetings in order to work with hitters. And I like that you brought up that question of focusing on strengths, which is also really what Andrew Bailey and the pitching staff have done, right? Like, you're not Tanner Houck. Your four-seamer is not as good as everything else you throw. Don't throw the four-seamer. Throw the sinker. Throw the slider. Like, throw the slider and then throw the slider again. It's particularly interesting to me. You talk about shaping coaching to the group. How much do you think that the fact that it is a young group, like, you think about when they implemented the team-wide hitting meetings, that happened in 2018 when it was JD Martinez coming on board to join a group that included guys who were kind of getting along 4, 5, 6 years of big league experience with the Jackie Bradleys and the Mookies and the Xander Bogartses. How much do you think that idea of simplify, like, narrow things down to what you do well is really kind of the right note to strike with young players?
Yeah, well, so team-wide advanced meetings have happened since I got to the big leagues in 2012.
Sure.
So it probably started even before that. Was the first game of every series.
I'm referring specifically to daily meetings, which started in 2018.
Right. Okay. Got you. Yeah. So I think, to the latter part of that question about the younger players, is obviously when you're young and in the big leagues, you're still developing, especially this group. It's not a ton of like highly touted prospects. It's guys who were considered 4A players until they made a splash in the big leagues this year. And they're moldable, right? Like, this is the time in their career. It's like to compare it to my kids. I want my kids to learn Spanish, right? I live in Florida. So we have a babysitter who's here with them when we travel, and she's bilingual. And I asked her, only speak Spanish to them, because they're moldable, they're young, they're going to soak everything in. That's the same thing in the big leagues when you get up there and you're 22, 23 years old and you're trying to learn how to be a big leaguer. You're still developing into a big leaguer. You have all this experience from the minor leagues, but you don't have the wealth of information. You don't have the best coaches in the world. You don't have all these tools and resources that you have as a big leaguer. And once you get there, if you are pushed in the right direction, which by this coaching staff, and this is all bias aside, the conversation I've had with Pete Fatsy, obviously I know Andrew Bailey from my years of playing with him and then getting to know him as a coach, which is completely different. Listening and watching him work in depth and looking at their platforms and their systems they use to nitpick every single detail in these guys. They don't necessarily tell these guys all these things. I think they sift through it and find what works for each guy. And that's what goes into these individual meetings, is saying, okay, everything you can possibly want to know about your arm angle, your release point, your spin rate, everything of how your body works and how you, quote unquote, unwind, how you let go of the baseball. Here's 3 things that are going to help you be your best out of the 1,000 things we have. So I think those individual meetings are first put in place to find out what works for the individual. So let's say Jarren Duran, what works for him? Well, they eventually got to a point where he wanted more power. Well, they found out his timing was better with a leg lift. So they went back to the leg lift. Okay, now that's mechanical. Okay, now we're going to get into approach, because I feel like a good approach and a good plan at the plate will buff out just about most minor mechanical deficiencies of a swing if you have a good approach. Because if your direction and your mindset is to the big part of the field, which we've seen him, when he's in trouble, what does he do? Ground ball to second base. Right? Ground ball to the right side, weakly hit. When he's locked in, which goes with a lot of these players, that seems to be the one constant with this group, is middle of the field, opposite gap, right? And we're seeing a lot of hard hit line drives there. If you hang something, they'll bang it, they'll pull it, but they're on the fastballs and they're on to the big part of the field. So I got off the tracks there to your question. You got me talking approach and we got blood flowing a little bit. But the main part of these meetings is to find out, really get to know the individual, because you can't do that in a group setting. You just can't.